If you're brand new with us, we're in a series in the book of Genesis. If you got a Bible with you, or if you're on your electronic device or whatever, go to Genesis 37. That's where we're going to be heading. This service is the service where you get to ask questions, relevant questions, hopefully. And they should be questions, not just statements that you want to make or whatever. But we'll take some questions. This is a fun, sad, but fun and interesting passage. We have been looking at the issue of Jacob. Abraham has a son named Isaac. Isaac then has a couple sons, Jacob and Esau. We'll see their relationship in just a minute. The promise is going to go through Jacob, and Jacob ends up marrying two different women, Leah and Rachel. So we talked about that last week. So nice he did it twice. We talked about all that was taking place with him. What the issue was, and what we're trying to get to, a little hard to see here, but the issue was we're trying to get to this family tree. Where does the 12 tribes of Israel originally come from? And they come from Jacob. Now, and Jacob has 4 wives to get there. 2 that he marries, like legit, if you can marry 2 women legit, but 2, and then 2 that are kind of weird in the sense that they're the maidservants of Rachel and Leah. So they get in there, they each have 2 children. So you can see here, the second to bottom line, there are 12 sons. They're the 12 tribes of Israel. It also lists a daughter. There are more daughters, but we're only introduced to one, Dinah. You'll see this week that there are more daughters, but we only hear about by name one of them. There, these 12 tribes. Leah has, you can see from over here, she has half of them. Then Rachel has 2, but they're the last 2 that are born, Joseph and Benjamin. And then the other 4 come from the maidservants. And so in this deal, that every one of the kids in the tribes of Israel is born not in a healthy, satisfying relationship. Leah is unloved, the Bible talks about, and so she has all these children, and she has these children just so that her husband will now love her. I mean, how messed up is that, right? Rachel, who is loved by Jacob, he really loves her, but she is jealous of Leah because Leah is getting all these children. And so every child she has, or even has her maidservant has, is really just to get back at Rachel. Try to even the score, so to speak. Then, and I got to keep them straight here, Zilpah, which is Leah's maidservant, Leah gets a little worried because it's 4-2, if you count it out. And she now says, wait a minute, I better get going on here to get this thing out of touch for Rachel. So then she has her maidservant have 2 more. So now it's 6-2. And in a hockey game, you're never going to come back from 6-2. I'm just saying. So it pretty much goes with kids too. That's pretty much does it. And so even though she ends up having 2 more, makes it 8-2, then Rachel has 2 more and it's 8-4. But it's still, Leah wins in that. And it's just this conflict. It's this messed up family completely. You'll see that real clearly today. And I'm going to highlight that as we go through. We ended in Genesis chapter 30 last week. This week, we're going to pick it up in Genesis 37. Between Genesis 30 and 37 are some of the most amazing stories, and I have to just give you a little bit on them, a little bit of, meanwhile back at the ranch. Now, if you're at all familiar with what that phrase means, those of you who are old enough, remember the old Westerns in the 70s and early 80s. They would have these Westerns, and John Wayne would do something, and then the director just realized there's no way I can cover all this, so this narrator's just going to come on and say, meanwhile, back at the ranch, and he's going to describe a few things. That's what I'm going to give you for about 5 minutes here. I'm going to give you Genesis 31 to 36, meanwhile, back at the ranch. Here we go. Starting in Genesis 31, okay? Back at the ranch. What happens? Last time we left, Jacob and his father-in-law, Laban, are at odds with one another. Jacob means deceiver, and Laban is trying to out-deceive him in this relationship. It is a crazy father-in-law, son-in-law relationship. They are just deceiving one another all over the place, whether it's for who they're going to marry or business practices. As you end in Genesis chapter 30, like we did last week, Jacob does that whole thing with the spotted ones. I get the spotted ones or whatever, and Laban says, okay, and then he goes and gets all the spotted ones. And remember, it gets worse, okay? You keep going on. It gets worse, so much so that they just say, dude, we're out of here. They part ways. And it takes a whole chapter for them to just speak clearly to one another. It is a crazy kind of a deal. Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32 is probably most famous. There's a few things going on there, but the most famous part of it is the part where Jacob wrestles with God. Okay, and this is actually some guy's sermon notes, Genesis Fight Club, which is interesting. When I saw that, I thought, man, you could do a series just about the fights in Genesis, because they're all over the place. But this wrestling with God is so important. I just want to read it to you, and it's kind of a step in what happens. I'm actually going to come back to this tonight and make some comments about it later on. It says, that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons. By the way, you can't just say his family. It's got to give this weird way of, okay, 2 wives and 2 maidservants and then the sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. They had 11 sons at this time, okay? After he'd sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. At first, it's just a guy, and then it seems to turn into like an angelic being, and then it seems like he wrestles with God. It's kind of like one of those, which is it? It's definitely either a representative of God or a way that God shows himself through a human form. We're not sure exactly what this is. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. So it says touched, but that word is a little bit weird in the original. It could mean whacked. So he dislocates the guy's hip. I mean, that's got to be, I've never had that happen. I got a little hip thing going on right now, and it hurts just to kind of get up. But I'm thinking, man, that'd be nothing than wrenching it out. So that's what's going on with Jacob, and yet he still goes after it, takes him to the mat, and he says, then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So now he's getting it, that this is either God himself or a representative of God. The man asked him, what's your name? And he says, Jacob. And the man answered back to him, and here's the blessing. Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel. And Israel means struggles with God. For you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome. Okay, so he gets a name change. He gets a name change from Jacob to Israel. Now, the kind of the confusing thing here, there's already a lot of names already, but from Genesis 32 on, I don't want to say 50% of the time, but I don't know the exact stat, but both those are used. Israel here and there, and Jacob here and there, and you have to remember, it's the same person, but that's where the nation of Israel gets its name, is from this passage. Genesis chapter 33. What happens here is Israel, or Jacob now, is on the move. Years has passed. He's had 11 children. He's been away from his brother Esau for a long time. And if you remember the last time we saw Esau was going to kill him. He said, the next time I see you, you're going to die. And so in Genesis chapter 33, Esau comes. And Jacob is thinking it's going to look like this, okay? Jacob is thinking he's for a fight club, right? He's thinking he's going to come for a fight. It's amazing. Whenever time I show this picture, I see people look away. So sorry about that. I'll just move that for you. But he's thinking he's going to just come after him and overpower him. And look how the passage goes. It says, Genesis 33, Jacob looked up and there was Esau. Remember the last time it was worded like that? It says, Jacob woke up in the morning and there was Leah. So this time he looks up and there's Esau. So don't look up in the book of Genesis. It's a bad deal. Looked up and there was Esau coming with 400 men. What's going on? There's 400 dudes coming. This can't be good, right? So look what this piece of work does. Look at what Jacob does. So he divides the children among Leah, Rachel, and 2 maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in the front. Then Leah and her children next. And then Rachel and Joseph in the rear. Can you imagine being one of those kids of the maidservant? Really, Dad? I'm just basically a speed bump for this army that's coming through before they get back to Rachel and Joseph. Are you kidding me? This is who Jacob is. Clearly has his favorites and clearly lets you know where you stand. Now, at least it doesn't say, and behind all of that, he put himself. At least he doesn't have that. He himself went ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approaches his brother. So he comes up to his brother And he bows down. And how's Esau going to respond? And it's amazing. Here this guy who promised death, Jacob deceived him, all these kinds of different things happen, and instead, Esau responds with grace. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. It's beautiful. Esau turns out to be kind of the good guy. And Esau looked up and saw the women and children and says, "Who are these with you?" And Jacob says, "These are the children God has graciously given your servant." That's chapter 33. 34. Moving along here. 34. Meanwhile, back at the ranch now. 34. 34 is probably one of the darkest chapters in the Old Testament. 34 talks about this one daughter that is named Dinah. And Dinah is part of the family, part of the clan of Jacob, and another clansman's son thinks she's really cute. And so he wants her as his wife. And instead of going through the normal way of coming up to the father and saying, "Can I take her out to a movie and ice cream," or whatever you do, you crazy kids now do nowadays, he just takes her, and the text says, and he violates her. He rapes her. Okay? But he loves her. He wants her as his own. In fact, he comes back and says, I really want her as my wife. Can I have her as my wife? And the brothers all say, "Sure, you can have her as your wife. We just ask one thing. We are a group of, one of the things we live in is covenant with God, and the way we show that is by getting circumcised. So we would ask that not only you, but your entire clan get circumcised in order to be like us, and then we'll give you our sister." So they do. They get circumcised. This is literally what it says. It says, while all of the men were in pain from this, the brothers all come and attack them. So I don't know who's the smart guy that said, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's all get circumcised on the same day." But they did. And they're all these adults who are circumcised now, and they're in pain, and, they're trying to fight. It's like, it's not going to happen. So they all get destroyed. They get wiped out as a clan. And Jacob is not happy about this. Look what he says. It says, then Jacob said to, and for some reason he picks out Simeon and Levi, and he says, "You've brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number. And if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household," meaning you, moron, "will get destroyed." And this is how the whole chapter ends. And there's no more dialogue. This is just how it ends. The brothers say, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" That's it. This is a strange, weird, dysfunctional family and you're going to see this even more so in this passage right here. Whoops. Whoa, that's cool. Okay. So Genesis 35. Genesis 35 continues on with this account, and Shannon, breaking everything. Okay, so they move on from this place, and Rachel's going to die. It says they move on while they're still some distance from Ephrath. Rachel began to give birth. Now, we didn't even know she was pregnant, but I assume she was. She was going to give birth and had great difficulty. And as she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, "Don't be afraid. You're having another son." And she breathed her last, as she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named this new son Ben-Ani, which means trouble. Now, I don't know how that would work in school when your name is Trouble. What's your name? Trouble. You're sitting in the front, right there where I can keep an eye on you. And so the father decides, no, kid's not going to go by the name of Trouble. He's going to be named Benjamin, and that's what he goes by. And his father names him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand, which I'm not exactly sure where that comes from. Now, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day, that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. So at the time of writing this, you could go there. Israel, that's Jacob, moved on again and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben, the oldest child, went in and slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah, and Israel, Jacob, heard of it. And that's all it says. There's just one line in the Bible about this weird family that, kind of creepy, the oldest son is sleeping with, what do you call it? One of the sister wives or whatever, okay? It's just creepy, and Israel hears of it, and they don't say anymore. It's just like, we don't talk about this, or I don't know, it's just weird, okay? And then it gives the list of the 12 sons, and this is the dysfunctional, crazy, every single one of them. Sons of Leah, 6 sons of Leah. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Rachel, now it's not going chronological. I'm not sure why, what the author wants to say to us here, but Rachel's listed next, and it's Joseph and Benjamin. They're the last 2, the babies of the family. Okay? Sons of Rachel's maidservant Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali. Sons of Leah's maidservant Zilpah, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Paddan Aram. And then that brings us to Genesis chapter 36, which is simply a listing of Esau's descendants and how kings flow out of it, which brings us to, back out of the ranch, Genesis 37. So, we made it. Thank you for your patience on that. But there's amazing stuff there, and I wanted you to see it. We're all going to look at Genesis 37. Genesis 37 is what Andrew Lloyd Webber used as the basis of his musical, Joseph and the Amazing, Jameson. Yeah, there we go. You're still smiling at me. Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. So, let's get after this. What we're going to do is what we do as we've been going through Genesis. We've been reading through the storyline of what happens, kind of making a couple comments along the way. Then we're going to pick 2 themes and see how those themes play out throughout the Bible. And we're all going to pick a few different spots. So, I mean, it's not like we're going to be able to follow how it completely flows out, but pick 2 themes. Here we go. First one. This doesn't start well because Jacob, Israel, has a favorite, and it's really clear. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. Now, let me just stop right there and make a comment. And this actually was a new thing to me. I love when I see new things in the Bible. It's a minor thing, but it's kind of a cool thing. That I always that the book of Genesis went, you get to Abraham, and then you get to Isaac, and you follow Isaac, and then you get to Jacob. So it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they're the big dogs. But then, in Genesis 37, we follow from there all the way to Genesis 50, which is 14 chapters. We follow Joseph. And you think now it's about Joseph, but it's really not. It says it right here. This is the account of Jacob. And it's going to give the account of what happens in Jacob's life, Israel's life, the man Israel, and it's going to follow. Our main character, the person we're going to follow here, is mostly Joseph, but it's through the life of Jacob, and he's going to reappear at the end. In a couple weeks we'll get there, and we'll see him again and how he reacts to all these situations. And then he dies, and that's the end of the book of Genesis. So it really is the account of Jacob. But at the same time, it is following Joseph. So here we go. We're going to meet him. We've already heard about him, but we've seen that he does anything. We're going to see a lot of things that he does now. Joseph, a young man of 17. Anybody 17 here tonight? Anybody 17-year-olds? Past curfew anyway, so nobody's 17. If you remember 17, 17 is awkward, right? You're the man child if you're a man. I mean, you think you're smart, but you're a moron. You are. I mean, you think you're there, and you're going to see this with Joseph. He just lacks discretion. We see it right away. He was tending the flocks with his brothers, and then it goes on to describe who those are. The sons of the 2 maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father, what? A bad report about them. So there's these 4, I assume that's what it means here. It's a little ambiguous. Could be that there was more on that phrase, his father's wives. But I think he's just saying, those 4, they're out doing something, and something didn't go right. We don't hear any more about it, but he brings back to Israel, comes back to his dad and says, I know something you don't know. He just narks on him, okay? Now, it gets worse. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Wow. It's one thing to just feel about it. It's another thing to announce it and write it in the Bible. It's right there in the Bible that I love this kid, Joseph, more than all the rest of them. Because he'd been born to him in his old age. He likes him even more than Benjamin. It's his favorite. Even though Benjamin was the last son, he likes him. He likes Joseph more. And he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Okay, let's just look at this and try to picture yourself there. Here's these 12 brothers, 4 different mothers, kind of like separate clans in a sense, even though they got the same father. They're competing for the affection of the father, clearly, right? And so he not only puts them in front for Esau to come through, but you got to make it worse that where it says Rachel and Joseph were in the back, now that's just going to be in there, stick in their craw all the time. And to make things worse, it says that he makes for him, and it's a little ambiguous in the original language, richly ornamented robe, which I know where his Technicolor Dreamcoat came from. We don't know exactly what this means. It could just mean long. We don't really know what the word means. But it's some special coat or robe or something. It's as if your mom and your family, let's say you had more than one sibling, gave you a t-shirt that said, Mommy's favorite. How's that going to go over with the other kids? Oh, well, we were just wondering who the favorite was, and we're just glad to know now it's you and not me. And that's what's going on here. There's huge brother rivalry. It ain't coming out. And there's just all kinds of things going on there, just deep. And they hate him, okay? Not only that, but Joseph doesn't have the best discretion in the world. Look at what happens. He has a dream, and he tells it to his brothers, and they hate him all the more. I don't know why. Listen to the dream. He says, we were binding sheaves of grain in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered round mine and bowed down to it. I don't know why that would tick you off. His brother said to him, you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. And he has another dream. He doesn't learn from the first one, he has another one. And he told to his brother, says, listen, I had another dream. Shut up with the dreams, right? And this time, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. And you could just see a 17-year-old to begin with, and you're saying things like this? And it's not just the 11 stars, which represents the kids. There's the sun and the moon. Well, he tells his father about this, as well as the brothers, and his father rebukes him and says, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, envious of him, hated him. But his father kept this matter in mind. Now, it's kind of a weird thing to say here, because he says, will your mother and I actually bow down before you? Remember, his mother's Rachel. Rachel died in the childbirth of Benjamin. So what he's saying here is not that it's just a physical thing, we're going to come and bow down before you physically. He's actually saying, you're saying that you're going to exceed us in legacy and importance and really make us so much so we're just subservient to you? Wow, arrogant. That's what it sounds like, at least. So this is the background to what happens next. To set up the story, to set up what's about to take place, Joseph gets sent on a task. It says his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. And very well, he replies. And so he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. So it's just kind of interesting there. The brothers are off doing this with all the flocks, and there must be a lot of cattle and sheep and whatever is out there. And because they're all out there, and Jacob's become a fairly wealthy guy at this time, so they're trying to find areas where they can graze these animals. But Joseph isn't there. I don't want to make too much out of it because it doesn't say specifically that he was just hanging out at home, watching television or something as they were working. But it is interesting that he doesn't go and do the grunt work. He just has to go, find them, see how they're doing, and then come back and give them a message. I don't want to make too much out of it, but it's kind of interesting. And so he says, then he sent them off from the valley of Hebron. And when Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields, wandering aimlessly, like, where are they? And asked him, what are you doing? What are you looking for? And he says, looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're grazing their flocks? And the guy says, yeah, they've moved on from here. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. Okay, now, what happens at Dothan is how this envy that's in the brother's heart plays out. Okay? So it says, but they saw him as he's coming. They saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. This is the disadvantage in living in a flat land with no trees, because they just see him as a dot in the distance, and they have time to plot his demise just as he's coming toward them. Now, I have no idea how they knew that it was him. Maybe it was the Technicolor jacket, or perhaps they heard Andrew Lloyd Webber songs from the people singing behind, or I don't know what it was, but somehow, I made that up today, it's kind of funny. Somehow they know it's him, and they have time to plot his death. And here's the plot. Here comes that dreamer. That's kind of funny. That was their nickname for him, the dreamer, right? Here comes that dreamer. They said to each other, come now, let's kill him. Now, we got to think about this because there has to be ways to cover this up. And throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Nothing's going to happen. We're going to get rid of him, right? Now, the guy who just a few minutes ago was the bum, Reuben, now comes out and he's the good guy. And he's the good guy in kind of an interesting way. I don't know if you grew up around friends that once in a while were going to do things that were maybe a little bit over the top. Perhaps like the neighbors had made them mad and they were going to do something really bad. I mean, put in jail kind of bad. Like, for instance, just picking this out of the hat, like burn the interior of a car or something. I don't know how that comes to me, but just something like that. And you're the guy or the gal that says, oh, dude, that is way over. You are, oh my gosh. Why don't we just, and instead of just saying, no, we can't do that, that's bad, you don't want to be that person, right? Instead, you say something else. So you give a different thing you could do that's still bad, but not as bad, right? Let's TP their house, right? So here's Reuben, and he says, we all hate him, that's agreed, but killing him? Ooh, I don't know about that. And he says, when Reuben heard this, so he's not part, the brothers are there, but Reuben's not part of that original plan. He hears about it, and he tries to rescue him from their hands. And he says, let's not take his life. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. And Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take him back ultimately to his father. So Reuben is saying, I'm going to try to rescue this kid's life. So when Joseph came, they liked that idea. Came to his brothers. They stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. And then a nice piece of information, the well or the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. So he could be down in there and not drown. So that's what they do with him. Now, it continues. And it says, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Now, the commentators make a big deal about this, saying that here's Joseph, he's in a well, and here's the brothers over here, and they're just happy as a clam. They're just eating KFC for lunch. They're just having no problem. In fact, investigators know this. I don't know if I should give you this piece of information. Hopefully you never use this. But they know that if they bring in someone who they're suspicious of into the questioning room, they'll ask you, are you hungry? And if you say no, generally speaking, you're guilty. And if you say yes, but you don't eat the food in front of you, there's something gnawing on your conscience. It's just the way the human body is something, you're preoccupied, you can't think about it. And so, but these guys are so seared of conscience that their own flesh and blood is in a well, and they're just chowing away. Their camels, talking about these Ishmaelites, their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah's a piece of work. We're going to see him next week. He's a major piece of work. We're going to do another Meanwhile Back at the Ranch deal here and talk about him real briefly. He's a mess, okay? But it's interesting. Which of the brothers does Jesus come from? Judah. Oh, man. Here's Judah's suggestion. What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? There's nothing really financially in this for us. Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. He has no problem selling the guy into a life of slavery, but we're going to get some money out of the deal too. So as the brothers agree. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him back to Egypt. The price of 20 shekels was the price for selling someone into slavery or for buying a slave. And then it says, when Reuben returned to the cistern, now Esau says, Reuben must not be part of this, must not be part of the lunch and anything, because he must be over somewhere else. And when he comes back, he looks for he looks for Joseph in the well. And he sees that he's not there, and he tore his clothes. He went back to his brother and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? So he's really worried about it. It's interesting what the Bible doesn't tell you, because it doesn't tell you any more about the interaction that they had with that, other than Reuben really wanted to find him and couldn't. So now they're going to cover it up. They go back to the father. They got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in blood. Then they took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, now it's interesting, they never lie. They never lie. They totally deceive their father, 100%, but they never actually lie in their words. First sentence. We found this. That is a true statement, right? We found this. Now, Joseph was wearing it, and he was totally fine when we found him. We didn't say that part, but we found this. Examine it for yourself to see whether it's your son's robe. Again, not a lie. It's just totally deceptive. And Jacob or Israel totally sees that it is his son. He recognized it and said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal, he gets the idea, has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces, and the reaction is he tore his clothes, which is an ancient way of total and utter despair and mourning. Put on sackcloth and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters, so again, here we see there are more daughters here, came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. We're going to see this exactly where we're going to pick it up next week, what happens to Joseph from here on. But I wanted to follow from here. It's very interesting to see that what they wanted was they wanted to kill Joseph, and therefore they thought they could kill their father's affection for Joseph, and then each one of them would have a 1 out of 11 chance of now being the favorite son. Now they get rid of Joseph, but they cannot kill the father's affection. In fact, he basically says, Joseph will be my favorite until my own death. Oh, man, really? Drag. So in other words, I'm going to care for him, and I will seal my heart off from all of you for the rest of my life. That's what he says. So, that's Genesis 37. Oh, happy day. I'm always amazed, honestly. If I were going to write a book to have people follow God, I don't think it would be Genesis. It's like, are you kidding me? It's so raw and so real and so messed up. It has to be true. I mean, it's like you can't make this stuff up. And especially if you're trying to write a book that's supposed to convince you to be a follower of God. So what are the themes that are here in this section? Now, I want to hit one that isn't actually in Genesis 37, but we've seen it a couple times, and now is as good a time as any to kind of bring it up. And the first theme I want to look at real briefly is just seeing and experiencing God. Jacob wrestles with God, and he also has this other experience where it talked about Jacob's ladder and the angels ascending and descending, and he sees God in a remarkable way and gets this the promise of his father Isaac and his father Abraham is given now to Jacob. And what I want to talk about is just this whole concept of seeing and experiencing God. Then the last thing, obviously, what this passage is clearly teaching us is about the corrosive power of envy. It just reeks of that, right? You can just smell it as you walk through Genesis 37. So let's start with the first one. Experiencing God. Now, I think sometimes in the Bible, we kind of forget what the main point is. I mean, you're walking along and you're reading it and you're different things, and you're kind of just like, yes, it's to believe and it's to live a better life and some of those things. And that's true. Those are true points. And even to say that the point of the Bible, the point of knowing about God, the point of church, the point of Christianity is to get to heaven. That's true, kind of. I mean, that kind of is true. But what's the point of going to heaven? Well, you can say, well, it's a lot better than the alternative, right? So it's like, yeah, but that's still not the right answer. What is actually the point? And the point of the Bible, the point of heaven, is God. The point of what we're trying to fix here is what happened in the fall in Genesis 3. And what happened in the fall is their relationship is broken. And how was their relationship before? Well, it says in Genesis chapter 3, describing how God related with them, it says that God walked with them in the garden in the cool of the day. There was a tight relationship. Do you understand that the point of heaven is God? The point of Christianity is God. If you go all the way to the end of the Bible, Revelation 21, it says, now the dwelling of God is with mankind, and he will live with them. He will be their God, and they will be his people. And then it talks about this nice way of saying he will wipe every tear from their eyes, Revelation 21, verses 1 to 4. And it's just this intense relationship. The point of the whole thing is God. And I think sometimes we lose that. We see all these doctrines, things to believe about God, or here's the things I'm working on in my life, or here's all the Bible stories and different things I'm trying to do in my life and manage my finances and know how to parent my kids and be honest and ethical in my business. They're all great stuff. But the point of it all is knowing and seeing and savoring a relationship, a real relationship with God. Now, when you start to see that, then you start to read the Bible a little bit differently. You come to the book of Psalms, for instance. By the time you get to the book of Psalms, you start to see this about what they want more than anything is a relationship with God. And you start to say, wow, that kind of makes sense. And you see these psalmists pouring out their guts to God. They're speaking doctrinal truth about God. Of course they are. But it's not just a list of doctrines. It's actually a relationship. Psalm 62. You could pick tons of psalms. But I picked Psalm 62. At Hope, this has been a very significant psalm because for many years, in the early days especially, we had some tragic things happen. And this became kind of a deep prayer amongst many of us at Hope. The psalmist says, find rest, O my soul, in God alone. It's like he's screaming at his soul to find rest in God. He says, my hope comes from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation. He's my fortress. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my honor depend on God. He's my mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your guts, your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. Do you hear that? These are not just concepts about God. This is a guy who's hurting. You can sense it. And he's saying, pour out your guts to him, Know him, follow him, ask him big. Let him know every hurt that's within you. And when he gets to the end of the psalm, this is what he says. This is the basis for his understanding of why he can do that. He says, one thing I know, one thing God has spoken, and two things have I heard. It's a poetic way of saying, I got two things to share. Here are the two things. Number one, you, O God, are strong, and you, O God, are loving. That's it. Now, I'm convinced that that is it. When you think of having a relationship with God, I'm not just talking about getting the doctrines right. And we love doctrine at Hope. Doctrine's important. But it's more than that. When you talk about having a relationship with God, it has to be based on those two things. That God is strong, that he's actually there, and he's great, and he's powerful, and he's also unbelievably good. I didn't grow up like a lot of you did in the evangelical church. Most of my friends, I became a follower of Jesus at 18. Most of my friends that I had who were Christians also didn't grow up in the evangelical church, the more conservative church, whatever you want to call it, right? I grew up going to church occasionally to a more liberal church, all right? Now, I think there's problems with that. Liberal, in essence, I don't remember hearing anything about that Jesus paid the penalty for our sins, that I was a sinner, and that I needed the cross in order to have my sins forgiven. I don't remember any of that. However, the liberal church did one thing really well, and they pushed the goodness of God. And I've never once doubted whether or not God is good. And as I'm around y'all more, many of you grew up in the church, you struggle with that. I don't know why the correlation is on that. I don't know what that is. But somehow, fundamentally, you got it worked out somewhere that God is actually just waiting to, boom, ha, I knew it. You're just waiting for that to happen. And it's like, really? Huh. You, O God, are strong, and you, O God, are loving. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, because that's who God is. Now, when you get to the time of Jesus, when he initiates what gospel living is going to be like, he continues on with this theme of experiencing him. He doesn't just say, here's the system of beliefs to believe, think on them, and that will set you free. He doesn't say that. He talks about a relationship. This passage is a passage I've thought of for 30 years. Listen to what it says. He says, Jesus is speaking to his disciples in John 14. The book of John has this incredible last night, the good, what do you call it, the Last Supper, which starts in John chapter 13. So, it goes a long time. John 14 says, I'll not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Before long, the world will not see me anymore, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day, you will realize that I'm in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Whoever has, and here's the verse that hit me for 30 years. Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he's the one who loves me. He who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love him and show myself to him. So now follow the logic here. He says, whoever has my commands and obeys them, so what is it? That people would have Jesus' commands, and they would actually step out and obey them. Now the interesting thing is, the gospel screams something to you. And the gospel says, we sang it here, he has hushed the law's loud thunder. In other words, I no longer have to obey. Jesus paid all the penalty for my sin. I don't have to obey. I am now free. The gospel teaches me that because I've trusted in Jesus Christ alone for the forgiveness of my sins, and that his righteousness is now mine, that I get to obey. Jesus says this. He says, whoever has my commands and actually obeys them, guess what? He's the one who loves me. You're set free now to follow him. Not because you have to, but because you get to. And he says, if you do that, and the order is right, if you obey, and obey is a sign of saying, I want to know you. I don't want to become anything. I don't want to earn anything that's already done. I just want to know you. He says this. He who loves me will love my Father, and I too will love him and show myself to him. Do you see that? That last phrase. Show myself to him. You want to know Jesus? What's he asking you lovingly to step out and do? Not because you have to, but because you get to. Saying, Jesus, I'm going to trust you here. This is scary, but I'm going to trust you. And Jesus says he will show himself to you. In about 1994, I believe, 94, 95, something like that, I was going through a real hard time. I was in seminary at the time, and that is a very difficult time. Forget what you're studying. It's just, I was working 32 hours a week as a teacher. I was working at an internship, another 20, 21 hours in a church, and I was going full-time to seminary. Just that alone, okay? Plus the stuff you're learning is kind of blowing your mind, but all of that. Plus we just had a second son, and he had colic. All right, so I'm going through this kind of stressful time, and money is unbelievably tight. And I'm putting to sleep John. I'm putting him down for a nap. I don't remember the exact date. I'm thinking he's 2 or 3 at the time, something like that. And there's nothing more unbelievable than holding a little child right when they're starting to fall asleep. They're trying to fight it a little bit, and you're holding on to them. Can you agree with that, Caravan? No, you hate your child. But of course you don't. You're just holding this little one, and it is amazing. If you're a couple here tonight and you're thinking of having children, don't do this, because you will just want one. Every other moment of the day, they're terrible. But that moment, no, your kid is perfect. I'm going to pray for you right now. But anyway, you're holding on to this. You're holding on to this child, and he falls asleep in my arms, and I'm just hanging on to him, and I'm just having a moment, okay? Just having this moment with this kid, and I put him down in his crib, and they're just precious when they're sleeping, and I look at him, and it hits me, and I pray to God. I say, God, that's what I need from you. I feel a million miles from you right now. I just need a hug. I know I just lost 10 man points from everybody in the room, but that's what I needed. Big guys can want hugs every now and then, all right? So I just said, God, I need a hug. The next day, I got unexpectedly in the mail, and this never happens to me, from an unexpected source, a check for $1,000. It just doesn't happen for me. And I knew instantly, it was the next day, that was his answer. I remember just holding on to the envelope. I have the envelope somewhere. I can't remember where I put it now, but it's like, whoa, God. And I felt hugged, okay? Experience God. Pour out your hearts to him, Hope. Ask him, God, I feel a million miles from you. Would you show me yourself? Is there something you want me to obey and I need to step out? You promised to show me yourself. Experience God. That's the point of the whole thing. Now, let's move to something that is exactly what the passage is talking about, and that's the whole point of envy. This picture, you can see it there. Oh, you have a bigger house than I do, all right? Oh, I don't like that. I envy that, right? That ain't right. It's their houses. Anyway, so you can see this throughout the Bible. This is no new thing. It's right there. The very first sin the second sin that's listed in the Bible after Adam and Eve is their sons. Cain and Abel both have offerings, and God accepts Abel's but doesn't Cain. Now, what does this have to do with Abel? It has everything to do with Cain. But Cain, it says here, he was very angry. Look at the last sentence there. And his face was downcast. And he's unbelievably envious of Abel. In fact, when you get to the time, when you keep walking through the Bible, you get to Exodus chapter 20, when Charlton Heston comes back down from the mountain, he brings down 10 commandments. One of the 10 commandments is, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. All right? So don't do that. Now, Cornelius Plantinga has written a book, and the book is called Not the Way It's Supposed to Be, talking about we live in a fallen world, and sin has taken over. It's not the way it's supposed to be. I think he's done a great job of showing that covetousness is a lot like envy, but not quite. And listen to this difference. It's really interesting, and it's really true. Envy is a nastier sin than mere covetousness. What an envier wants is not, first of all, what another has. What an envier wants is for another not to have it. To covet is to want somebody else's good so strongly that one is tempted to steal it. To envy is to resent somebody else's good so much that one is tempted to destroy it. The coveter has empty hands and wants to fill them with somebody else's goods. The envier has empty hands and therefore wants to empty the hands of the envied. What the envier really wants is to spoil something or someone. Cain no longer wanted Abel's blessing, he wanted Abel's death. That's exactly what's going on there. And that's exactly what goes on within us. Somebody else gets that promotion. Somebody else gets a spouse before you. Somebody else has a child. They have a Lamborghini, or that's not my world. They just have a car that runs. That's my world. And you just, not only do you don't want that, you want to ruin what they have. Proverbs talks about this and says, what does that do to you? It says, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots your bones. By the time you get to the New Testament and Jesus comes on the scene, the religious establishment is filled with envy towards him. If you look at the end of this, after Jesus heals Lazarus and all these people come to him, it says the Pharisees say to one another, see, this is getting us nowhere. Look at how the whole world has gone after him. Now, instead of saying we should have a strategy meeting and think about how to make our understanding of God more attractive so we can get more people, they don't do that. They want to kill Jesus. They want to destroy him. You can see that. It becomes really clear at the end of the Gospels, even to Pilate, an outsider to the whole movement. They're going to set free either Barabbas or Jesus, and he says, which one do you want? And they say, give us Barabbas, this murderer. And the last verse here says, for he, that's Pilate, knew it was out of envy that they'd handed Jesus over to him. He saw it clearly. You're just envious. So how do you overcome envy? What's the gospel answer to overcoming envy? Matthew 20, Jesus gives us the answer to this. Let me give you just a real short background on this. There's two sons who were part of Jesus' 12 apostles, James and John. Jesus gives them the nickname Sons of Thunder. Their dad name was Zebedee, so Zebedee might have been a bear of a man, or the two of them might have been just really pieces of work. I think it was the latter, because there's another account where they come into a town and they don't get favorably met. And James and John say to Jesus, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven upon this village? I mean, it's like, can you just see Jesus as they're walking through and these guys are asking that, and Jesus says, okay, they're works in progress, all right? I'm working on them. Holy smokes, these guys are sons of thunder, right? Well, in this case, they get their mom to do something. I like to call her Mama Thunder. And it says this, the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, so they put her up to this, and kneeling down, ask a favor of him. What is it you want, he says, and she says, grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. I'm going to be generous, Jesus. You can decide which one sits where, but I want one on the right and one on the left. And Jesus' response says, you don't know what you're asking. He says, can you drink the cup I'm going to drink? And they say, we can. And Jesus said to them, well, indeed, you are going to drink from my cup of suffering. But to sit on my right and my left is not for me to grant. Those places belong to those to whom they have been prepared by my Father. So this is what's happening. Mom is there. Two brothers, they come to Jesus. Okay? It's Matthew 20. We're quite a ways into the gospel. What happened? What do the other 10 think about this? They're just standing there watching this happen. Well, look what happens. When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. Why? The audacity of you to ask that. Secondly, why didn't we think of that, right? Get my mom up there. I mean, you really seriously, you brought your mom? Your mom. I mean, come on. You brought your mom? That's cheating. So Jesus used this instead of saying, Jesus is so amazing. He uses these moments that are so tense that as a parent, I would have just said, if I have to stop this car, right? If I have to stop this gospel kingdom movement and come back there and whack you guys, he doesn't do that. Jesus calls them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. You know the way this is the way society works. There's a pecking order, and you always want to get up, and the man is trying to put you down. That's the way it works in the world. Guess what? Not so with you. That's not the gospel way of living. Instead, I'll tell you how to be great. Whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man, me, did not come to the world to be served. And I could. I'm the second person of the Trinity. I came out of heaven, and I came down, and you could all just bow to me totally, and I didn't do that. I came here to what? To be great. How? I came to serve you. The way of the kingdom turns everything upside down. But to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. You want to be great in the gospel? So what does the gospel do? The gospel does this. Jesus comes, and he now sets me free so that I don't need the best job, the best family, the best picket fence, the best car, whatever. If you have those things, good for you. I've got a restored relationship with God Almighty. That's what the gospel says. I'm okay. I don't need anything. And because of that, I'm set free now for the first time in my life to not live envious about everything you've got and the way your life is going and all that. I'm your champion, and I say, good for you. That's what the gospel does. That's gospel living. Corrosive power of envy. Now, let me open it up. Any questions at all you might have on this snowy night? You may not realize it, but you got about 17 feet of snow outside. So might as well ask questions. We're here for a while. Yeah, there you go. Yep. Right. Yeah. No, it is good. It is good. It's a good comment. The question is, it seems like in John 14 that it's conditional. The love of Jesus towards you is conditional upon your obedience. That's actually, you could look at it that way. The way I think it just flows with everything else to say, I've got to go back there. So it's going to take a little while. There'll be music here while I do this. This is way back, isn't it? Oh, man. The passage says, and I could quote it, but I'm probably getting out of order. Here we go. It says, whoever has my commands and obeys them, he is the one who loves me. Okay? So you could read it that the way you love Jesus, the way you prove your love for Jesus, and therefore then he'll love you, is this. But it's another way of looking at it would say, how do you know who's a Viking fan? Right? Well, I didn't hear you, and I don't want to hear what you just said. So you could see they have a response. There's a certain way that they act. How do you know those who are love Jesus? Well, they follow him. Right? That's just what it means. I mean, Jesus, that's the way it works. And so if you're changed by Jesus, you're going to be one of these people that does that. And so I look at it that way clearly, because this doesn't even make any sense in the light of the gospel. However, with that said, don't downplay where Jesus flat out asks you to do something hard, and you just, we did a series, not this summer, but the previous summer, called Jerry Bridges' book, Pursuit of Holiness, where he says, don't pray for victory. You already got victory if you're a follower of Jesus. Pray for obedience. You just need to obey. That has impacted me greatly, because there's a lot of times where I'm like, no, I just need my heart changed more. No, you already got everything. Follow me. Trust me. You got it. So don't downplay the whole idea of, I need to just follow. I get to just follow. So, great. Sure you are. Sure you are. Yep. Sure you're still loved. But this, he who loves me, he who's in this, I would say it starts because your relationship with God, which leads to your obedience. You will be loved by Jesus. You will be loved by the Father. And then you will be shown Christ as well. So, maybe I'll hit you more. You don't look completely satisfied, but I'll move on here. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's great, actually. The whole deception thing. I did spend a little time on that last week as well, but we didn't have a third service. Wasn't it Super Bowl last week? Yeah. Um, Deception is an interesting thing. So I think, we're not to deceive. However, we're not to give everybody all the information either. So if someone comes to me and say my wife is over at some restaurant somewhere, and they put a gun to my head and say, tell me where your wife is. I'm not going to tell you where my wife is. Shoot me. I'm not going to, if they wanted to kill her, say. I'm not going to give them the information. So there is Jesus, it's very interesting too. He doesn't give, if you follow his answers to people, never deceives or lies. But if they're not asking honest questions, he doesn't give them an honest answer. He doesn't give them a straight answer. So, if someone in your family is deceiving you, I don't think that you're not going to make it undeceptive by deceiving them back. I would say in a family situation, I'd have to know a little more specific. I don't know if you're hypothetically making this up, but would be more to cut to the chase and try to get around. I'm trying to think of a situation. I try never to ask my kids questions that they can't answer either, okay? I'm not going to ask them questions like, I'll just shoot straight with you. I'm not going to ask them a question like, tell me right now, have you ever seen anything inappropriate on the internet? It's like, well, duh. I mean, everybody has seen something inappropriate on the internet. I'm going to say, hey, I know this is going to happen from time to time. What do you do when that happens? I'm not going to ask a question that, quite honestly, a kid's going to lie to me. Because they're going to want to lie. I mean, who's going to say, oh, yeah, oh, man, you should say what I saw yesterday. It's like, no, that's not what they're going to say to me. I don't know if this lands where you're itching or not, but now, with that said, we valued honesty with our kids an awful lot. That was unacceptable to lie about things, because once you start getting deception in a relationship, when can I believe you? I don't even know when to believe you anymore. So I try not to push it. I try not to pry and give them questions that they'd have to lie in order to save face. But at the same time, lying is unacceptable because we don't have a relationship then. It's just a lie. So, no, Jacob and Laban are not good examples, is the answer to that question. So, one more. Any more? Yeah, way back there in the Chiefs. That's a great question. Yeah, that's a really good question. I thought about that this week as well. The question is, how do you overcome? What are other examples how to overcome envy in your life? And I think, first of all, just acknowledging that you have it, right? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that. If you have brothers and sisters, you probably have it. I'm an only child, so I don't have any sibling rivalry whatsoever. I mean, I used to sit in the back seat and say, he's touching me, and my parents thought I was the weirdest kid ever, so... that kid to a special school. What's going on there? So I didn't have that. But if you have siblings, you probably have rivalry. I know when I had the three boys, I'm like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? And so there's a lot of rivalry. Not really for our affection necessarily, but just for things or whatever. And you could see it in the heart of a little 3-year-old, right? They'll be over there playing happily, and then another kid will come and grab some toy, and now the only thing they want on the planet is that toy. So it's kind of inbred within you. It's like you're having more fun, and I want to not only take that toy, I want to destroy your fun. So it is human, and I'd say sinful, thing that I think only the gospel, only when I realize that I'm satisfied in Jesus, and Jesus actually meets my needs. And so I know that sounds like I just said it, but I'm going to say it again. I think that's the answer. Because I think until you get to the point where you are really okay in Jesus, and the gospel settles in. Now, listen, folks, the entry point of the gospel, this table right here, bread and cup, right? You're brand new. If you want to come to know Jesus Christ, you can tonight. But I'm saying it's a journey to let that gospel penetrate you so deeply that you actually start saying, I'm okay. I'm okay if I lose my job this week. I'm okay if my best friend says he never want to speak to me again. I'm not saying it's not going to hurt, but the gospel starts to ring in your life so deep that you say, that's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And you start then getting a glimpse of these crazy people who are followers of Jesus that went and did these crazy, Mother Teresa, right? How can she do that? Because the gospel's so deep within her. And she knows Jesus that well. So I know that it sounds like a broken record, and I'm a preacher, so I got to bring up Jesus. But that is the answer. I don't know how else to overcome envy, because I think any other strategy just basically leads you right back to the problem. So, hey, let me ask you two questions as we close. We move to a time of just response tonight. We're going to close with a couple songs. During those songs, feel free to go to the back table or this table, and I think there's a one upstairs as well, and just get some communion. Use this time as a time just to meditate, to ask the Lord just a couple quick questions. God, I want to have a relationship with you. I don't want to just know about you. I want to know you. Show me yourself. Is there something you want me to do? Is there something you want me to stop doing? I want to know you. I want to have you speak to me. Hug me. And then ask the Lord, just during the next couple songs, where's my envy meter at? Where am I at on that? Am I giving it over to Jesus and say, Lord God, I'm not going to want from people. I'm going to actually want to serve them. Let's pray together. God, I want to thank you for this night, this snowy night.